Break it down for us. What do we know and what kind of information was stolen?
So what we know is that in mid-August, JP Morgan and at least one other big bank were breached in what appears to be a very sophisticated attack. In at least one of the cases they went through basically the bank's front door. They managed to go through a vulnerability in a public-facing web app, which in these banks is really, really hard to do. They spend a lot of money locking that down because it gets hacked all the time. In terms of what was taken, it looks like there was a lot of consumer information of customers that could be used in the right hands to try and liquidate accounts. We don't have any information that any accounts have been liquidated, but a bank that did receive a briefing from the FBI wasn't one of the victims, but was told that in fact what was taken was consumer data that could be used to liquidate accounts, which is a pretty startling thing for any bank to have to deal with.
So at this point, Michael, are customers being warned? What are they doing to prevent these accounts from being liquidated or any additional action?
I mean, obviously, the banks are trying to figure out what needs to be done. They didn't tell us and didn't give us any extensive comment on how they're dealing with the breach and how they're dealing with the loss of data. So right now, we actually don't know what the banks are doing in terms of trying to warn customers or clients. They could be, if it's commercial customers, they could be trying to do that directly. But this was a really, really, really big amount of data. So my guess is that they've got a lot of, if they're warning people, they've got a lot of people to warn.
Now, Joe, as Michael mentioned, this appears to be a very sophisticated attack. What can you tell us about how they did this? Obviously, a company like JP Morgan has certain controls against these kinds of things, but they were able to find a way in.
Human error is always going to be our biggest downfall as we try to couple, putting people in charge of different technologies. And clearly there's an oversight of some sort, or there's an actual vulnerability, a zero-day vulnerability that might have taken place where they weren't able to be prepared because you don't know what you don't know. And that's exactly what a zero-day vulnerability is. It's almost like having a window open in your house, but not necessarily knowing that the window's open or you even had a window installed. And so with that mindset, it's often difficult to even try to plug the hole that you don't know exists. And you're going to see that much more prevalent in the industry as well as the economy as we move forward in this cyber, underground warfare, that things like this are going to become almost more of a day-to-day occurrence because of the amount of dependency on cybersecurity or cyber technology that we have today.
Mike Riley, let me ask you, part of the U.S. sanctions against Russia have specifically targeted the bank accounts of individuals and some of the oligarchs in Russia and Putin's inner circle. Is there a reason that JP Morgan was selected here, or is it just because they had the weakest defense?
I don't think it was because they had the weakest defense. A bank of that size, and JP Morgan in particular, spends a lot of money protecting their information. There's speculation out there. JP Morgan, back in April, made headlines in Russia and, in fact, drew the ire of Russian officials specifically because because of the sanction, it stopped a transfer from a Russian embassy to a subsidiary of one of the U.S. sanctioned banks. The Russian Foreign Ministry stepped in, called the decision stupid. Commentators in Russian use JP Morgan as kind of the example of the ridiculousness and justice of the sanctions. So to the extent that there is a potential link between the sanctions and JP Morgan as a targeting, that's one of them.
Now, Joe, as far as you can tell, does this appear to be retaliation for some of the U.S. government sanctions against Russia? And what kind of fingerprints might these hackers have left behind that we could actually track them down?
Well, that's the thing about the economy and the way the culture is in Russia. Even if it's not a government-backed or endorsed action, there's a lot of groups that operate out of Russia that are going to do it for Mother Russia. They're going to do it for the pride, for the attitude, for the retaliation of their own personal beliefs. No different than, say, someone in America might picket an organization or a movement that they disagree with. So it's their way of kind of giving their opinion about what they don't like that our government has done, or not necessarily something that your Russian government has endorsed. In regards to fingerprints, that's a very tricky thing because some hackers actually perform and leave fingerprints behind themselves because of the way that they exploit the actual vulnerability. There might be, connections with IP connections that they've made in, the methods that they performed. They might even sometimes leave behind clues just to do that.